The doors of the courthouse creaked open as Pam Bondi stepped inside, her heels clicking confidently against the polished floor. The air was thick with anticipation. Journalists whispered into microphones, cameras zoomed in for every subtle expression, and the entire room could feel that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Bondi didn't just walk into that courtroom, she owned it from the moment she crossed the threshold. Clad in a sharp navy blue suit that radiated strength and professionalism, her eyes scanned the room, unshaken by the tension hanging in the air. Every seat in the gallery was filled. The media lined the back wall, their lenses already trained on her. Supporters and skeptics alike held their breath as they waited to see what the former Florida Attorney General would do in the face of serious judicial resistance. The judge, an aging figure with a reputation for shutting down opposition in seconds, adjusted his glasses and leaned into his microphone. His tone was already clipped and condescending. "Ms. Bondi, let me remind you, this court does not tolerate political grandstanding. Any breach of decorum will result in a $50,000 fine. Do you understand?" The words echoed like a threat, one clearly designed to intimidate. Murmurs filled the gallery. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Bondi, unfazed, responded with a calm, "Understood, Your Honor," but there was a quiet fire behind her eyes, a silent message that she wouldn't be bullied into silence today. She took her place at the podium and opened her folder with deliberate precision, showing no sign of retreat or hesitation. There was something about her composure that set the tone for the entire proceeding. The courtroom's energy shifted. Even those who had doubted her resolve began to lean forward, curious. This wasn't going to be a standard hearing. She glanced briefly toward the audience, locking eyes with a few supporters, then turned back to face the bench. The judge stared down at her, waiting for a misstep. Everyone could feel the rising tension, like a storm building just out of view. But instead of backing down or playing it safe, Bondi stood taller, her voice steady and unshaken. This was her battleground now, and she had no intention of walking away defeated. The silence that followed was not empty, it was electric, loaded with the anticipation of what she was about to reveal. As Pam Bondi began to speak, her tone was measured, deliberate, filled with the weight of experience and the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She laid out her initial points calmly, weaving together legal precedent, constitutional concerns, and public interest like a seasoned strategist. The courtroom listened intently. Even the judge, who had clearly entered this hearing with a plan to suppress her, seemed momentarily thrown by her confidence. But that flicker of hesitation vanished quickly. As Bondi pivoted to address the more sensitive elements of the case, elements that brushed dangerously close to long-ignored corruption, the judge's posture shifted. He leaned forward, brow furrowed, jaw tight. This wasn't what he expected. This wasn't the script he wanted to follow. And then, like lightning out of a clear sky, he struck. "That's enough, Ms. Bondi," he barked, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "You've crossed the line." He reached for the gavel, not out of routine, but like a man ready to use it as a weapon. With a loud bang, he continued, "This court hereby imposes a $50,000 fine for contempt. Your behavior is out of order and inflammatory." The words felt surreal, like something from a scripted drama, but this was reality, unfolding in real time. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Phones went up, reporters froze. Bondi, meanwhile, remained still, her face unreadable. There was no shock, no stumble, no visible reaction. It was as if she had anticipated this exact move. She didn't even blink. Instead, she gently closed her folder and took a moment, allowing the courtroom to simmer in disbelief. Her eyes met the judge's with an intensity that pierced the silence. Everyone expected outrage, some expected retreat, but what they got was something far more dangerous, calculated control. She placed her hands on the podium again, slowly, with purpose, like a general repositioning before delivering a final blow. Around her, whispers surged again. People couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. A sitting judge attempting to silence a seasoned legal mind with a financial penalty. It wasn't just dramatic, it was desperate. But Bondi was not someone who could be bought into submission, not by money, and certainly not by intimidation. The fine meant nothing to her in that moment, not because of the money, but because of what it represented, fear. The judge was afraid, and that realization wasn't lost on her. In fact, she allowed it to hang in the air for just a second longer. The courtroom sat in a stunned hush, not because of what had been said, but because of what was coming next. She hadn't come just to speak. She had come to dismantle an illusion of authority that had gone unchecked for too long. And the judge had just handed her the proof she needed. Pam Bondi didn't raise her voice. She didn't react with fire or fury. Instead, she slowly opened the folder in front of her, revealing several neatly organized documents, each one marked and tabbed with precision. Her fingers moved with the calmness of someone completely in control. The judge, still scowling, tried to regain the room's attention, but Bondi had already taken hold of it, without saying a word. She picked up the first sheet, held it up just enough for the front row to glimpse the official seal at the top, and then began to speak. Her voice was firm, low, and unshakably clear. She began by referencing a ruling the judge had made just 3 years prior, one that seemed routine on paper, but under scrutiny raised questions about selective enforcement and political bias. As she continued, paragraph by paragraph, she connected that ruling to a chain of decisions the judge had made, decisions that all conveniently benefited a small circle of financial interests, most of whom had donated to local political campaigns, including one suspiciously tied to the judge's former law firm. Gasps echoed as her words unfolded like a legal thriller. But this wasn't fiction. Bondi was showing receipts, each one timed perfectly. She wasn't accusing, she was revealing. The kind of reveal that you don't see coming until it's too late to spin. The judge tried to interrupt again, tapping the gavel once, then twice, more out of desperation than authority. But even the sound of that gavel felt hollow now. Bondi simply turned her attention to the next page, her voice unwavering. She cited a rarely discussed ethics complaint that had been quietly dismissed years ago, one that named the judge in a case involving misuse of judicial discretion. She paused, then added, "This complaint never made the headlines. But it never went away either. It's been sitting in the archives, waiting for someone to ask the right questions." The gallery was no longer whispering. They were dead silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing, their eyes fixed on her, trying to process what they were witnessing. The judge's face had lost all color. He looked like a man who had just realized the trap wasn't being set, it had already been sprung. He leaned back in his chair, lips tight, fists clenched on the bench. But Bondi wasn't finished. She reached for a final document, an email chain obtained through a public records request. It clearly showed correspondence between the judge's former aide and a private lobbyist. The dates lined up exactly with a controversial decision the judge had issued just weeks later. Coincidence? She asked the court, letting the word linger in the air like smoke. No one answered. They didn't need to. Every word she spoke dismantled the judge's moral authority. Every document she laid down stripped away another layer of assumed power. She didn't shout, didn't grandstand, she simply exposed. And the truth, when wielded with such surgical precision, was louder than any outburst could ever be. The fine, the threats, the attempts to silence her, they now looked petty, pathetic. And Pam Bondi stood at the center of it all, not just defending herself but holding the system accountable in front of a live audience that would never forget what they'd just seen. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he reached once more for the gavel, clearly searching for control in a courtroom that no longer listened to him. His voice cracked ever so slightly as he attempted to interrupt. "Ms. Bondi, this line of argument is irrelevant to the case at hand. You are out of order." But she didn't flinch. She didn't even glance at him. Instead, she calmly turned to her briefcase, pulled out a small hardcover book, and placed it gently on the podium. It was a legal precedent book, annotated and highlighted. The gallery leaned in again. Everyone could feel the momentum shifting with every move she made. Pam opened the book to a marked page and began reading. Her tone remained calm, deliberate, but there was now an edge to it, a tone of finality that could only come from someone who knew she had just cornered her opponent with undeniable truth. The ruling she read aloud was a Supreme Court decision from the early 2000s, one that protected legal advocates from being fined or silenced when presenting matters of public concern, even in contentious courtrooms. "It is not only permissible, it is necessary," she quoted, looking up directly at the judge, "that advocates speak on matters which affect public trust in the judiciary." The courtroom held its breath. The judge tried to speak again, but Bondi, without raising her voice, continued. She laid down another copy of that ruling, this time printed, with highlighted portions and a citation number bolded in red. "Your Honor," she said, "this isn't a violation of decorum. This is a legal right guaranteed by the highest court in the land. And any attempt to punish me for exercising that right would itself be a violation of judicial ethics and constitutional protections." It wasn't an argument, it was a declaration. She had flipped the entire courtroom power dynamic in under 2 minutes. A murmur began to rise again, this time from the press section. Reporters exchanged glances. Notes were no longer just being taken, they were being typed as headlines. The judge looked shaken, as if the walls were suddenly closing in. He turned to his clerks, whispering urgently. One of them leaned in, whispering back, their expressions growing increasingly grim. Bondi waited, arms crossed, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough for the pressure to build. Then she spoke again. If the court would like to proceed with the fine, I will be filing an immediate motion to vacate based on constitutional violations, and I'll do so with the full support of legal counsel, precedent, and public transparency. The words were sharp, direct, and unmistakable. It was now a dare. She had gone from defendant to prosecutor without changing her stance. The gallery, sensing the climax of a showdown, remained frozen in anticipation. The judge finally leaned forward and muttered something almost inaudible to his assistant. Bondi didn't need to hear it. She already knew. She had just drawn a legal line in the sand that couldn't be crossed without serious consequences, and the judge, for all his earlier bravado, now understood that he had pushed too far. The gavel remained untouched. The courtroom remained silent, and Bondi, she stood unshaken, a calm storm that had completely flipped the balance of power with nothing but law, facts, and fearless resolve. There was a long pause in the room, one that seemed to last far longer than it actually did. The judge, now visibly rattled, leaned back in his chair and avoided eye contact with everyone in the room. His earlier sternness had faded into something quieter, something uncertain. The gavel he had wielded so confidently before now sat untouched beside him, its symbolic authority stripped bare. Pam Bondi stood silently, watching, not with arrogance, but with purpose. She wasn't just there to win an argument. She was there to defend the right to speak truth in a place where truth had been suppressed for too long. The gallery could feel it, sense it deep in their bones. Something rare had just happened. Power had shifted, not through shouting or protest, but through precise, undeniable exposure. After what felt like an eternity, the judge cleared his throat. The court, he began, his voice noticeably softer, will withdraw the fine previously imposed on Ms. Bondi. That single sentence sent a ripple through the courtroom like a jolt of electricity. The reporters immediately started typing again, some even whispering the words aloud as they went. Pam gave a slight nod, acknowledging the moment without the need for dramatics. The battle had never been about money. It had been about principle, and she had just made her point with such clarity that the entire courtroom bore witness to it. Outside, the courthouse steps were swarmed with people, supporters, journalists, cameras flashing like lightning in a storm. As Pam exited the building, the crowd erupted into cheers. Microphones extended toward her, reporters shouted questions, and cell phones captured every moment. But she didn't rush, she didn't boast. Instead, she stopped at the top of the steps, turned to face the crowd, and offered a brief, controlled smile. Transparency matters, she said into the swarm of cameras. No one is above accountability, not even those behind the bench. Her words echoed louder than the cheers that followed. The public now had a story that wasn't just about one courtroom or one hearing. It was about standing your ground when the system pushes back, about the courage to confront power with truth, and about the kind of leadership that doesn't yield under pressure. Within hours, clips of the moment flooded the internet. Hashtags trended across platforms. Analysts debated the legal precedent she cited. Headlines read like a political thriller. Bondi breaks the gavel, judge retreats under fire, $50,000 silence order reversed in stunning courtroom reversal. But those who had sat in that room knew that what they witnessed wasn't theater, it was history. Pam Bondi, with nothing more than documents, precedent, and unshakable composure, had turned an attempt to silence her into a national reckoning. And as she disappeared into the crowd of supporters and flashing cameras, it was clear, this wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of something far bigger.